Hi, I'm really excited to bring this Christ Revealed interview to you. Let's go ahead and jump in.
Well, I started to ask myself as an atheist, hey, are there some things that I believe are true or exist that are extranatural? I was a guy who loved thinking about cosmology, and all of us grew up in the Star Trek generation. We were always thinking about space travel and time and all these different issues. And so I was always somebody who believed in the standard cosmological model, this idea that everything in the universe, all space, time, matter, comes into existence from nothing. And when we say nothing, we don't mean space, time, or matter. Space is not nothing, space is something.
Right.
So we're stuck with either redefining the term nothing or having to account for some first cause that is not spatial, temporal, or material.
Right.
Now, if that first cause is also personal, in other words, if it's not an impersonal force, it's a personal being, that's still an option, even I think in Big Bang cosmology. So, I mean, I would think that this is still a credible, reasonable option for us. And if there is a being that's powerful enough to blink everything into existence, all space, time, and matter, I'm betting that being could probably walk on water. So I think what that did for me is it said, look, I really am focusing on what would be much smaller miraculous activity, much less miraculous than the beginning of the universe. Right. That would be the Genesis 1 would be the penultimate miracle in all of Scripture, given the way we're thinking here. And if that could happen, if there's a personal being that could accomplish that, then I think you've got to at least consider the reasonableness of all the lesser miracles that you see in the New Testament. So that at least kind of put them in play for me. In the end, though, the question is, were these accounts, how do we account for the accounts if they're lies?
Right.
Or do they imagine them? So I think it's about any criminal investigation. We're looking at all possible explanations when we first begin. And we basically eliminate those explanations that are either impossible based on evidence or less reasonable based on evidence. And this is what we do in every crime scene, in every criminal investigation, in front of every jury. The jury is going to do the same thing. You're going to get a proposal from the prosecuting team and then another alternative explanation from the defense team. And they're going to have to decide which of these two explanations is most reasonable in light of the evidence. That is a process that's actually known as abductive reasoning. And so I just applied this to, okay, we've got this claim about Jesus rising from the grave. We've got some bare, minimal pieces of evidence that I think we have to account for. It certainly emerges pretty quickly, this idea about the resurrection. We've got what appears to be an empty tomb and no body available. I think that's a reasonable conclusion, given the fact that you could end this entire story in the first century by simply taking the body of Jesus and displaying it. It'd be over. And that never happened. But you could explain that, though, a number of ways. Doesn't mean the resurrection occurred. But you have to explain it. Right. We've also got to account for the eyewitnesses who never recanted during any of this time in the first century. Clearly, the second way to get this to go away quickly, if you're opposed to Christianity, is if you don't show the body of Jesus, well, at least get those people who said they saw him alive to recant. And we see this in the second, third, fourth generation of Christians, people who weren't eyewitnesses, but they were trusting the testimony of eyewitnesses. Right. Some of those people were tortured. And we have people reporting back to the emperor that they successfully got some of these people to recant. But you have absolute historical silence about the eyewitnesses ever recanting. I can see why somebody who didn't know if it was true or not and was just trusting somebody else's story might want to recant the story under pressure. Right. But the eyewitnesses, we have a collection of martyrdom stories. And even if we don't know that all of those martyrdom stories are necessarily reliable, we do know that we have no record of anyone ever recanting. They went to their graves with this claim. And so the question we have to ask is, well, does that make it true? No. Again, there's ways to explain that. Right. So we're looking at a few facts: the empty tomb, the transformation of the disciples, the fact they never recanted their story. There are a number of simple facts I kind of started to assemble.
And they had motive to recant, which is interesting, right? If they're being tortured.
They're being tortured, right. And so the question is, what's their motive to... Look, motive comes down to three things. There are only three reasons why anyone commits a murder. I learned this years ago. And it's also the same three reasons why anyone steals something or commits another kind of crime or lies about anything or anything you've ever done wrong in your life. You only did it for one of three reasons because there's only three motives behind bad behavior. And once you know those three motives, it makes it easier to work a homicide. Because I'm not walking into death scenes and going, oh my gosh, there's 1,000 reasons why someone could kill this woman. No, there are only 3 reasons. You find me somebody in one of those categories and we're good to go. So a lot of what we're doing is not, to kind of blend a metaphor, it's not rocket surgery. It's really straightforward.
Right.
So it turns out it's pursuit of money,
Right.
sex or relationships, and power. Those 3 things will motivate people to do things they ought not do. And if you're suggesting a conspiracy came together of a large number of people, well, they've all got to have something in one of those 3 areas. And that's where I found this to be really compelling, in the sense that I could not find motive. So I look at all the ways I could explain the basic facts, right? I think there are like 7 ways to do this. Either the Gospels are true, that's one way to explain it. That's the Christian way to explain it. Right. But I might suggest, well, no, they're lying, or they're hallucinating. Or, he didn't really die on the cross. He was badly beaten, he went unconscious, but it's a resuscitation, not a resurrection. Right. Or an imposter sat in for him. Or this is a late legend of an early version of Jesus that was, twisted over the years until it became the supernatural. There's a number of ways to explain this without affirming the Christian explanation. And as an atheist, I held 1 or 2 of those other 6 explanations. Different ways, alternative ways to explain the minimal facts that we have to explain about this event called the resurrection. Well, look, I asked juries, look through your list of evidences, examine the evidence, compare that evidence to the explanations, and you tell me which is the most reasonable explanation in light of the evidence. So I found myself asking the same question. Okay, here's the evidence. Look through these 6 or 7 explanations. You tell me which is the most. Now remember, every explanation has a strength and it has weaknesses. Everyone does, even when you have the truth. Cases in which we've convicted guys who confessed later, our cases had weaknesses in certain areas. We just pushed through. So even when you have the truth, it's going to have something that's going to seem confusing. It always does. So I would say, okay, all of those explanations, I think they all have deal killers. I don't think this is a lie. I think he really did die on the cross. I can go through all that with you, but to be honest, I went through all 6 and got to the last one, which is the Christian explanation. And I said, wow, the Christian explanation does account for the basic facts best. Everything makes sense if it just happened the way it was written.
Right.
But it has a deal killer for me, a flaw. I thought it was a fatal flaw at the time, and that is that it requires a resurrection. Now, it turns out I have to ask myself, okay, well, what am I really investigating here? I'm investigating whether or not a supernatural event like the resurrection could ever be a reasonable explanation. But I would have said, no, I don't believe in the supernatural. But I'm starting off then with the conclusion when that's the very thing I'm supposed to be investigating.
Right.
So I said, okay, let's at least suspend your doubt for a second. Let's take a look and compare all these explanations. Every one of those has 3 or 4 problems. This one has 1 problem. And guess what it is? It's my presuppositional bias against the supernatural. In other words, I could remove it. The only thing that's keeping me from it was my presupposition against the supernatural. Now look, when it comes to conspiracy theories, I can tell you 5 or 6 reasons why that just did not happen that way, because I've worked conspiracies. I know how hard they are to pull them off. But when it came to this side, the Christian explanation, it doesn't have any of those kinds of fatal flaws. The only flaw it has is that I don't like supernatural explanations. So it turns out, when I looked at my collection of explanations here, the one that had the least problems was the Christian explanation, and the only problems it had were me. My bias against the possibilities of anything supernatural. So I knew it was time for me to be really honest, and that's really when I started to ask, well, can I explain everything in the universe with my naturalistic approach? Can I explain, simple things like consciousness, free agency? Can I explain the appearance of fine-tuning in the universe? Can I explain the origin of the universe? Can I explain the appearance of design in biology? Can I explain the beginning of life? Can I explain objective, transcendent moral truths? Can I explain this incredible standard of good by which we call anything evil? I think those are the things that I had to try to explain, given my naturalistic perspective. And it turns out, really, to be honest, the best explanations for those things are also something supernatural. So in the end, it was this cumulative case that started to weigh on me. And I realized that the resurrection really is only out of bounds for me because I chose it to be out of bounds. And if I simply lay that bias down, the New Testament began to open up to me.
Thanks so much for joining us for this interview, for taking this Christ Revealed journey with us. Remember, if you haven't already, subscribe. That way you'll get notified about all the new content that's coming down the road. Comment. People want to hear from you, and then maybe you'll encourage somebody else to make a comment. If you did like it so other people know that it's something good for them to watch. And finally, share this. Send links to other people that you know and care about. Cost you nothing but maybe a few seconds of your time, but it might have a massive impact on their life. Anyway, really excited to be able to share this information with you. Thanks for tuning in.